Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us on our listening session here for locomotives. Just really briefly, guys, my name is Rich Boyd. I'm the Assistant Division Chief of the Transportation and Toxics Division here at CARB. Before we get started, we're going to have Amanda go over some of our Zoom procedures here, and then we're just going to hop right into it. We want to make sure we leave a lot of time for questions and discussions, and so we're just going to go ahead and get started. And there'll be some procedures for you guys to enter comments and whatnot that we'll go over in a hot second. So again, thanks for joining us, and we are going to roll and go right now.
Thank you, Rich. Okay. Do you mind going to the next slide for me, Jen? Okay, so first off, we just want to let everyone know that we do have simultaneous translation for Spanish today. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a small globe, and you can select Spanish once you click on that. We won't be asking you to select English. Just go ahead and stay in the main channel if you don't need the translation. And then, of course, if you do click on the Spanish translation, you have the option to mute your original audio in case you don't want to hear the main session in the background. And then if you're on a cell phone, there'll be 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner under More, and the translation options are there. Next slide. And then if you have any questions during the meeting, Alyssa just sent out a chat. Her name is Submit Questions here. Okay, sorry about that. So you can submit any questions about how to access the translation to Alyssa, and those can be in English or in Spanish, and she'll get them translated and get a response for you. Next slide. Oh, sorry, Jose asked that we go over that one more time. So again, if you're just coming on for interpretation, in Spanish. Can you hop into the main channel for me, Jose? And I will unmute. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Buenas noches. La reunión de hoy se está llevando a cabo usando Zoom. Si quiere escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor de oprimir el botón en la parte inferior de su pantalla que dice interpretación y seleccionar español. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Jose. And then if you can help me out too with the Spanish conference line. So if you're calling in and you don't have access to the Zoom application, you won't be able to hear translation. So we have a separate conference line that you can call into. And that conference line number is 866-803-2146. Again, that's 866-803-2146, and the passcode is 10835550. Jose, do you want to unmute and translate that for me?
Si no puede participar en esta reunión de hoy usando el sistema de Zoom, aún puede participar usando su teléfono. Para participar usando su teléfono, por favor de llamar el número en la pantalla 866-803-2146 y oprimir el código apuntado allí que es 108-3550. Gracias.
Thank you. That's perfect, Jose. So before we move on, is there anyone that's having an issue accessing translation? If you are, please raise your hand, and we'll give about a minute here. Okay. I don't see any hands right now. Again, you can use the chat feature and message, submit your question if you are having trouble accessing translation. Next slide. Perfect. So we do ask that if you're not speaking, please make sure that you're muted. Sorry, if you are not speaking, please make sure that you're muted, just out of respect for everyone. And then we also would appreciate if you have an organization that you're affiliated with, you can rename yourself. And you do that by in the top right corner of your screen, of your picture, there should be 3 dots. You can click on that and you'll have the option to rename yourself. So we'd appreciate if you can do that if you have a organization that you're affiliated with. Next slide. Okay, and then for muting and unmuting, at the bottom left hand corner of your screen, you should see a microphone. So that's how you mute and unmute. And then if you are calling in, you can dial *6 to mute or unmute yourself. For today, we have everybody automatically muted. So we'll be sending an option for you to unmute yourself if you raise your hand. And we'll get into how to raise your hand in a couple slides here. Once the host has asked you to unmute, you'll get a pop-up that says the host would like you to unmute. You'll select unmute and then you can talk. And then we just ask that when you're done, please mute yourself again. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. And then right next to your mute button, you'll have your video so you can turn it on and off. We do encourage you to turn your video on if you're comfortable, especially if you're speaking. It helps us to be able to see your face. Next slide. Okay, and then the raise hand option. So when we do open it up for comment, we encourage you to raise your hand so that we can call on you. And depending on the version of Zoom that you have, it may be in 2 different places. So for some folks, if you click on the participants icon, you'll have it at the bottom as an option. And for others, you'll see it in your reactions. And then if you are on the conference line, you'll dial *9 to raise your hand. And we'll also check in with the Spanish conference line. Next slide, please. Okay, and then you'll notice we are using the chat function today. So you'll see some messages with links and also explaining who you can go to if you have questions. However, if you want to send a chat, it won't go to everyone. The chat will go directly to one of the hosts or co-hosts. So we ask that you select the name *submit your question, and Alyssa will be answering questions sent there. You can send a question about tech problems with Zoom, or if you want the panelists to answer a question, you can send it to the chat as well. And also, and I think Alyssa just sent that out. So if you look at the chat, you can see where that's coming from. And then also, we will be sending a follow-up email after this meeting that has the recordings and the meeting materials. So if you'd like to receive a follow-up to this, please send to Alyssa to that *submit your question. Please send your email there and then we'll be able to follow up with you. And I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Rich. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. So before we continue, just to orientate folks on why we are here. And so this is a listening session, right? And so we're here to listen to the community. We want to hear about your experiences living and working near rail yards, the concerns you have about rail yards, and your thoughts on how we can help address those issues. We do have some panelists here to help field questions, and so I'll just kind of mention those. We have Justin Wong is here, Jennifer Kazumplik, and Jay Mangit from our railroad team is here. We also have May Colcord and Debbie Klossing from our enforcement division. And then we also have a couple of guests with us, Jeannie Ward-Waller from Caltrans and Roger Cluxton from the California Public Utilities Commission. Also, I'd like to introduce Chanel Fletcher. She's our newly appointed Director of Environmental Justice here at the Air Board. And before we continue, Chanel, I didn't know if you wanted to say a few words. If not, that's okay. Just unmute yourself if you did.
I'm unmuted. Okay. Well, I will never not take the opportunity to say a few words. So that is very true about me. So thank you so much, Rich, for inviting me to be here. I'm super excited. I know that Crystal and Jose from the Office of Environmental Justice have been a part of these conversations, and I'm just very happy to join tonight and to kind of have this listening session, kind of hearing more about direct experiences from community residents, and really thinking about how I think CARB and the Office of Environmental Justice can work together on that. So thank you guys so much, and I'm really excited to be here.
All right, thanks, Chanel. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Jen, who's going to walk us through a brief presentation just to help to seed our discussion. Jen?
Yeah, hello everyone. Okay, so after that big buildup of this is all for everybody to talk, I'm just going to give three slides and a contact slide, and then it's all for everybody to talk. So just so we have the same sort of vocabulary and understanding, that's my main objective. All right. And this slide doesn't want to advance. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is a picture of a rail yard. It shows all the equipment, all the sources of, I'm pointing at the screen like you can see me, all the sources of diesel exhaust that operate in a rail yard. Not all the sources, many of the sources. So most of this equipment, it is under a regulation or will be under a regulation, including timelines that will get them to zero. And CARB has a fact sheet describing this equipment in more detail. Alyssa, will you share the web address for the fact sheet in the chat right now? So what we're working on now is a draft regulation to address that last equipment type not yet moving to zero, which is locomotives up there at the top. Okay. So in trying to understand how to regulate railroads, it's useful to know what the differences are between the operating types. So these are the categories. The class designation represents how large they are based on their operating revenues, basically how much money they make. Class 1s are the largest, followed by class 2s and class 3s. The class 1 railroads that operate in California are Union Pacific and BNSF. They own thousands of locomotives of varying tiers. A tier is a level of engine cleanness, with the lowest tier, tier 0 or pre-tier 0 being the dirtiest, and tier 4 being the cleanest kind you can get right now. Some of the locomotives from these large operators, class 1s, stay local, but the majority of them move in and out of the state. Class 3 railroads and industrial are much smaller. The locomotives they own are typically older, and they tend to operate more local operations. They aren't used as much as class 1 locomotives either. Passenger locomotives are the ones pulling passenger cars like Metrolink in Los Angeles or the Capitol Corridor here in Northern California. All right, so this is the thing that we worry about when we do this regulation. The exhaust that comes out of a locomotive smokestack is diesel engine exhaust. And one component of that exhaust is something we call PM a lot, or PM 2.5, you'll hear that said, which is just what PM stands for particulate matter, which is what it sounds like. That's particles. They're very tiny particles that can travel deep into the lungs, and some are small enough to even get into the bloodstream. Exposures to PM have been shown to lead to all the things listed here: acute respiratory symptoms, asthma, bronchitis, heart attacks, cognitive deficits like learning disorders, lost work days, premature death, and increased risk for cancer. And I'll be willing to bet everybody listening at least knows somebody that's affected by these health issues. So that's it for my content. To get more information, here's the webpage where you can visit. This top page is kind of every effort that we're taking to understand more about locomotive emissions or to try to limit those emissions. Everything we're doing to understand advanced technology, So Alyssa, if you would share this in the chat, and then I'll just point you to the left side of this screen. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving or not, but along the left, there's a blue list. And in that list is a meetings and workshops link, and that'll take you to everything that we're doing right now in terms of past workshops and meetings. So you'll be able to see PowerPoint slides from old meetings, recordings in some cases of old meetings, and also news about meetings and workshops that are coming up. Our next workshop about the locomotive regulation that we're working on is going to be March 30th, I believe from 1 to 4 p.m. But keep looking at that page to see if there are any developments on the date and the timing. I believe they're fixed at this point. So I think that's all I have. Jay, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think we can continue.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Jen. So that was it for the the presentation, just to see the discussion. And so at this point we're ready to take questions and comments. And I do want to make one correction about the panel members. I mentioned Debbie Klossing from our enforcement division as a panel member. Actually, the other panel member is Rebecca Geyer. Debbie is here though; she's just a participant. And so, with that, do we have any questions from anybody? Any questions for the panel? So I see LaDonna with her hand up.
I can't believe I'm the first one to ask a question. Looks like you guys got pretty good participation. So actually I have a question, more so a few comments, but several questions. And I'll ask them in sections so that I don't take up all the time. One is, first, I just want to say thank you guys for responding to our request to want to be part of the listening sessions on railways, because this is a subject for most of us that live next to it. We hear them all the time, and they've kind of settled into, a normalcy for us. So we get that, oh, there's a train going by. But the information that I've read that you guys have provided was really new to me and surprising in the extent of health effects. So I'm really glad that you're hosting this session so that we could get more information. Many of us are living not only just like directly across the street from the train tracks that go, into our neighborhoods almost every 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but we're also living by raw sewage plants that's a few feet away from that, refineries that's a few feet away from that. So we're getting these compounding, exposure levels, but the train we thought were more innocent. And now we know, well, not all the way, but we know somewhat that there is more than just the noise pollution that we're getting. And then I also want to commend you for listing who the participants are, because we've been coming into these meetings and other agency processes. We have no idea who we're talking to until they show up and make a comment. But to be able to know who's on board, you introduced everybody so that the community gets an idea of who we're engaging in. We really do appreciate that. So I guess having said that, my question is, what advice do you give to frontline communities? By that, I mean frontline, fence line, what I just described. We have, many of us leave out of our doors and maybe, and I might be overcalculating, but maybe 100 yards away is a train that comes through the community. What are we to do? Like, what should we be asking you guys that we don't know to ask you that you should be sharing with us about the concerns? And particularly those of us who are poor, can't afford to move. What do we do? Are there plants? And I'm not trying to be funny, I'm just throwing out ideas. Are there shrubbery or plants or something we can do? Air filters, is there something we can do to offset this, what is really a threat to our health? What can we do?
Well, Jen, did you want to start? Or did you want me to start with the response? I can start and then folks can jump in. First of all, LaDonna, thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, step one is what we're doing right now. What you guys are all doing is we want to hear those concerns, those specific concerns. As far as the understanding of the types of locomotives that operate, you know, there is the potential to, you know, we want you to know that there's a difference between the tier levels, the older ones emitting more, the newer ones emitting less. And so that's one of the things in the direction of our regulation. It's really twofold. We want to push industry away from those older tier locomotives. And we want to encourage the development and implementation of new technology so that we're minimizing that exposure. So as far as the plants question, we've got that in a couple of workshops, and I'm not the best person to respond to that. There are some studies that that are out there that you know, show that there are some benefits of that as well, but I'm also not the forefront in knowing what's going on in that. So don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
I'll add to that if it's okay. LaDonna, to address your question a little more about what are we to do. So I think some of it is about finding the information, like figuring out what are the emissions that affect you. And we do post information about emissions in the South Coast on our website, and we update it every year. It's shared voluntarily by the Class 1 railroads. It won't give you an idea of what's happening in your neighborhood, but it'll give you an understanding of how dirty is the fleet or how clean is the fleet, are the two major fleets that are operating in the state. The other two things that I've seen work are direct communication with, like, through community steering committees or through local committees, direct communication to local rail yards, asking them to prioritize cleaner equipment, operate cleaner equipment in local places. I don't know if you are in an OCAP community or if you are on a community steering committee. If there were one in your area, I know that you would be on it. So it's a lot about just seeing what you can get them to do voluntarily in the meantime. But like Ajay said, what we're doing right now is trying to make it so that every locomotive operating in the state has to operate as clean as possible right now and has to continue pushing forward to zero very aggressively, I would say.
And then Jen, we're getting a request. Do you mind sharing your screen, if that's okay?
Oh, sure.
We can get
Yeah, we'll do.
And then LaDonna, I want to give you a chance if you wanted to respond to any of those comments. So I'll ask you to unmute.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you're right. If it was a committee, if that I know about it, I would be on it. But I do have a question when you mentioned reach out to the you know, the train folks. Do you really expect that if we ask them to make their trains more, you know, less toxic or retrofit them, do you really think that the community has that much pull to get them to do that? Wouldn't that be something that we would really, I think, push you guys to enforce them to do? Because they're like the refineries. They're not going to do it without some sort of push and force from folks that got the money and the power to force them to do it.
So I think through community steering committees, I have seen interaction between the railroads, particularly between the Class 1s and the community, where they give data about what they're doing. And I know steering committees have funds to fund cleaner equipment. That's only part of the solution, though. I completely hear you on that. And they're big fish, and we are all little fish. So I hear you on that question.
Jen, this is Rich. Why don't you give just, or Jay, just a little bit of a high level description of some of the upcoming, activities that we have for locomotives and rail yards, because that may help orientate folks in terms of some of the activities that we have going on here at CARB to help with that.
Sure. So as I said, the next workshop on the regulation is the 30th of March. But in general, the regulation does 4 big things. It collects data that everyone in the state will be able to see about what are the emissions happening statewide. It limits idling unless it's absolutely necessary. It, sorry, there's my dog. It provides a mechanism where the railroads must buy cleaner equipment in a fairly sizable quantity. And it also addresses the old equipment. And this is one of the problems with the current level of regulation on locomotives, that older equipment is never banned or outlawed. They're allowed to operate it for as long as they want. So the regulation attempts to address all those issues within locomotive operations, increase the uptake of cleaner equipment, start getting rid of the older equipment, push forward into zero, show us the emissions, show us what's happening statewide, and limit unnecessary idling. So those are the things that the reg is equipped with, and that's what we're going to go forward to try to develop. That regulation, that draft regulation, is going to go before the board in early 2022, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Jen. And we're there's a couple of more commenters, but we're going around the table. We have plenty of time here today, and of course, I mean, we're not limiting time at the mic, so to speak. But I do want to make sure we had a chance to hear from everybody. But just to kind of follow on to what Jen was saying, one of the best things you guys can do to help us out is when we have the workshops and certainly the board meeting, come out and make your concerns well known. Be very vocal, like many of you have, because we're looking to go to the board on that in April of next year. So, so who's our next commenter, Alyssa? I didn't see who was.
I think next Jonathan had his hand up. So Jonathan, I'll go ahead and unmute you, and go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I am going to be transparent. I'm a AB 617 OCAP, community air protection or community air protection program community. It's not easy getting rail, and I was able to get the Port of Stockton, not the rail, and even the Port of Stockton said it's not easy to get with the rail. So I really don't want it to be very disingenuous when you say having the committee themselves be the ones to carry the leverage to get the things involved. It's not easy. These companies make billions and billions of dollars. They don't care. They just want state funding to pay for it, even though they can easily pay for the equipment. It's going to really need a lot of regulation, unless or another sort of thing that will really make them change. Something happens, either their equipment gets destroyed or their equipment, something happens. But other than that, like nothing, it's going to be really hard to like have a steering committee or like a community steering committee to have some sort of leverage or have some sort of say in what these companies do. Because at the end of the day, we're messing their profits. They care about their bottom line, and that's it. So for us, I think I guess my question is the same as LaDonna's question is, is there going to be research from the CARB? Because unfortunately, a lot of the research for this case is a lot of private grants. Are there going to be state-funded research grants that look at vegetative barriers along train tracks and rail yards? Because I know for us in Stockton, the one thing that we are looking for is vegetative barriers. There has been only one company, and that's in Oakland, which is Hyphy Labs, that has done a really robust research on vegetative barriers alongside big corridors. Are you guys open to more research on that end?
This one I think I need to let Rich or a Jay take, because I'm not sure how I'm not sure what's in the pipeline for research.
Yeah, I would need to check specifically to see where that was. I don't have that information, offhand, but I can say when it comes to, vegetative barriers, I don't know if folks are familiar with the CEQA comment letters that we put out. It's actually one of the recommendations that we have in there. And granted, it's most of those letters focus on, warehouses and distribution, centers. And so we are recognizing that the benefit of that, and we are asking folks to consider that as part of the mitigation when they're doing those, types of projects. I have seen some of the data about their effectiveness. They're effective. They're effective, and so we are making that recommendation through that avenue. It's not like regulations or anything like that, but I think that's something we would just have to kind of think about a little bit, a little bit more. But we do recommend them, and have been doing so. Real quick, I just wanted to check to see. I see that our EJ director has her hand up, so I wasn't certain if she had if she wanted to respond to something before we take the next commenter.
Yeah. So first of all, again, this is my first listening session, and so I think a lot of this is like listening to other people. So I'll be brief, but I did think that the question that LaDonna raised, because it felt like there's a question around immediate actions or things that we can do as we're grappling right now with this air pollution, and I think the idea of like plants, and I did not laugh at that, because I think, are there ways, or is there research? And obviously, I mean, I don't know if it's this division, is there research or things that we can share with, I think, the communities that are impacted by this now that can at least help address, I think, these concerns as we're kind of in this like process of developing this reg. And so if we don't have the answer to that now, are there places where we can go to figure out, here are some of the actions, or here are some of the things? So I do think there's like an immediate need of like, I am living in this now, I'm inhaling this now. What can we do to curb that?
So I think that's something we'll take down and have to follow up on.
And that's fair. And I think I can commit to kind of continuing to kind of keep this conversation going in terms of the CARB team, because obviously we work together. So I think that is, and Madonna, we haven't met yet, but I hope we meet soon, because I think that is something that I felt very passionate about when I heard your comment or your question. And so we can keep talking about that, Rich, too.
Hi, this is Rebecca Geyer from Enforcement, and I wanted to also jump in. I don't know if you're aware of something called a supplemental environmental project. This is a way to help to get funds from CARB enforcement penalties back into communities. And it can be things through projects that are designed to put trees around rail yards. I don't know specifically the details of those, but I know that there's options, and it really, the limitations on those are come up with some ideas that may help the community. There may also be some projects that are on the list that could kind of spur some ideas. So I can share the list and our website for that if it would help anyone, but those are ways that we can get, into the communities pretty quickly, because through our enforcement penalties, and I can't tell you offhand how much we put towards it last year, but it was a significant amount.
Okay, well, we have a question from community in the chat if we want to do that real quick. This is from Taylor, who's with EYCEJ. They ask, is there an update on where CARB is on working with the South Coast AQMD on the rail indirect source rail concepts?
Hi, Taylor. Thanks for joining us today. Since we last had our joint workshop in South Coast, that was at the end, I believe, of 2019. And we're still conversing. We're doing less of a joint workshop going forward, but we are coordinating. We are meeting with them on a regular basis. And the latest from South Coast is, I believe, they're targeting the end of the year for a date that they're going to be going to their board with on the Railyard side. And our board date is in April of 2022. So it's pretty similar in that sense. So coordination is still happening on that front, just a little less. We're not going to be having workshops together, if that makes sense.
Okay, who's next, Alyssa?
It looks like Linda.
Oh, wait, hold on. Before we go, I see that one of our panelists has her hand up, so I didn't know she had a response to something. Jeannie, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, I wanted to chime in actually on the previous question, but don't want to interrupt. I'm here mostly to listen. But hi, everyone. I'm Jeannie Wardwaller from Caltrans. I'm our Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs, but I also oversee our rail and mass transit division. So just on the comments about what can be done in terms of the investments that the state is making, we do make a number of rail investments through several state programs, so that we see that as another opportunity to incentivize cleaner locomotives and also better planning of how these trains are moving through communities as well as idling at rail yards. So I just want to make sure we're, for everyone on the line, we're making the distinction between rail yards are where there really is a significant accumulation of pollution because the trains are sitting there idling. If the train is transiting through your community, there is still some pollution, obviously, but the bigger concern is that that accumulation. So we're making a number of investments at the state level in terms of trying to reduce the time that trains are idling in rail yards. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I want to certainly invite you to work with Caltrans as well as CARB on sharing your comments and concerns, because we have an opportunity to influence that as well, and are certainly in regular conversations with the railroads as well as a lot of the passenger rail providers on how we're improving transportation around the state. But it's also an opportunity to make those investments cleaner and clean up the emissions. So we'll be updating our rail plan this year. I'm happy to share information with folks if you're interested, but certainly invite your comments to us as well. And I'm taking notes. So thank you for letting me participate.
All right, thanks, Jeannie. Before we go to the next commenter, can we do a quick check to see if we had any questions coming from the Spanish conference line? Just to make sure we're all clear there. Okay, sounds like we may be. Okay, so who's next, Alyssa?
Linda Cleveland, you're next. Gonna unmute you, and then you can unmute yourself and talk.
Good evening, and I'd like to thank Jose so much for giving me the link to this meeting because I'm learning quite a bit. I'm from Watts. I'm with the Watts Clean Air and Energy Committee, and right now we're going through some issues with TOCs. So the transportation-oriented communities. So we have people who are building housing right next to the railroad tracks. And we have trains going through the center of Watts daily, 4 or 5 times a day. And they idle. And I was wondering, what is your position as far as city council goes? Because city council is giving these developers coming into our community permission to bypass CEQA so they don't have to do environmental reports to let the community know what's going on. So you guys may have your rules and regulations, but developers are going to the city council, and city council and probably the county too are giving them permission to bypass all the environmental requirements. So how do we go about resolving that type of issue?
Jen, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start, but I may need some help. My understanding of CEQA is that if it meets the standard, a CEQA process is required regardless of what the city council says. So that would be a thing that I would think we would want to know about. Am I correct in that, Ajay?
Well, I'm also taking notes as you're describing it, so there might be some more information that we could follow up with after. But typically, Yeah, I might defer a little to Rich on this one as well, just because it's CEQA related. And these are the opportunities to hear what you guys are saying. So appreciate you joining and appreciate you raising it for us.
Yeah, I could say just a couple of quick words about the CEQA process, just from the understanding, point of view. Like I mentioned before, we do author a fair number of comment letters, but the thing about CEQA, it's driven by the lead agency, and so that's either a city council or a county board of supervisors. They are the the final arbiters in those decisions, and so the other parties, their role is really to comment. And it's one the unfortunate thing about about CEQA, the way to really enforce that, or if there's a disagreement about what the lead agency is doing, is through the courts. And so as an agency, we have gotten involved in some of those with the Attorney General's office. But one thing I would recommend, if there's like any concerns about a particular CEQA project that you see going through, is to go ahead and reach out to us. We do our best to try to identify CEQA projects in the state, and we're trying to expand our ability to do so, to move beyond not just freight facilities, but we're also looking at the pollutants and toxics in facilities. We're trying to expand that horizon a little bit. And so if there's something that pops up, we can give you some contact information to some folks to reach out to, who you can talk to on that, and see if it's something that we might need to take a look at and comment on. Okay, who was next? I see some hands back up. I see Ladonna's hand up, Stephanie, Mark, and
Mark was next, so I'll go ahead. Mark, you're unmuted, so go ahead and.
Yeah. Hey, thank y'all. I'm Mark with Eastyard Communities. I live in East LA, just off of the main line from the East Yard, the Union Pacific East Yard. So I think there's tons of issues that we could talk about, right? But I think we've been in communication with CARB for the last 2 decades about these issues, so I won't go into those details. But I think something that's come up that's kind of a newer issue is because of social distance learning, where our children are at home during the day, right? And so for those of us that live against rail lines, that live up against rail yards, unfortunately, the exposure is greater now than it was before, when they were going to school for several hours a day, right? If we're lucky enough to have them at a campus that also isn't up against these facilities. So I'm just wondering if there's something that CARB can consider, or just part of an analysis of the potential impacts of children during this time, as something that should be mitigated, right? And understand, schools will be opening up soon, but there is a harm that has been created in this process. I think additionally, generally speaking, it doesn't make sense for public funds to be used at all for quote unquote near zero technologies. I think, especially when they're giveaways to industry, right? To some of the richest industries in the whole world. And I think, I have some appreciation for CARB, and just encourage CARB to step up more, to really come in, because the South Coast AQMD has really transformed itself over the last couple of years, from being a regulatory agency into being a funding body. So they're not talking as much around how do we regulate industry to be more health protective, but how much money can we give away to ask them to buy, new things, and even at that, not even with a focus on zero emissions. And so, I'm part of the AB 617 process for my community, And it just feels like a lot of times they're playing stupid. They're acting like we haven't been talking to them about these things for years, that we haven't been, pushing them, that their board hasn't taken action in the past, when it had a different makeup than it does now. And I think that's where it really takes, an agency like CARB to step in and say, no, these things are possible. And we really need the local or the regional agencies to step into that, right? So just really, really looking forward to that continued leadership from CARB. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
If I can jump in, this is Jose. I wanted to respond to Miss Linda's comment about the city council. And so my name's Jose and I work in the EJ unit. And, after hearing some of the conversation, I recognize that there are things that, we could help with by just directing you to other resources. And I recall, and I think LaDonna can, attest to this, that the EJ, the Attorney General has an EJ Bureau, and, they've helped people in Vallejo with the cement factory. And I think where you think injustices are occurring that are maybe not kosher, and, we definitely want to hear about them, but there could be other folks that might also want to hear about them. And so I just wanted to make that comment. And, I'm happy to connect you with folks over there, Linda. And then about the vegetative barriers, there's a California Natural Resources Agency, and there's a talented person over there, Melissa Jones, that does grants for vegetative barriers. And so where, where possible, we'd like to share that kind of information so that, it's easier to support your community. I'm sorry, I thought my camera was on. I didn't mean to do it without it. Anyways, thank you. That was it.
Okay, thanks, Jose.
Did we want to give LaDonna a chance to respond?
Yes.
Okay, LaDonna, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there were others that you hadn't heard from and they raised their hand after, I can wait till afterwards.
Okay,
So
let's
go ahead.
Go ahead, LaDonna.
Okay. I was just, I forgot who all said it because a few people then went past, but I think there was a comment made that might have been by Jen when you mentioned some of the statewide data. And what comes to mind to me is we get that because that sounds like agency language, but we're local. So we need to know, what do we do locally? And I think, and I apologize if I mispronounce, is it Chantel or the new EJ lady? She communicated exactly what we're feeling and what we're thinking. And I'm getting texts from some of the community people too. Is like, well, we can't eat data. We can't eat the reports. We need to know now, what are some of the remedies that we can take on as we're trying to figure our way through this. I'm hearing vegetation barriers. Great. That's stuff that we need to know and hear about, because many of our residents are battling cancer and other serious illnesses. And this is an urgency for us because within the last week, we've had 4 hits on our community. And when we say hits, we mean live hits from Chevron Refinery and Phillips 66. And we're literally sitting ducks on the fence line, front line, where we're out here feeling woozy. Some folks are thinking, oh my God, this feels like I have a bout of high blood pressure. Others have reported they actually thought we were having the beginning pains, shakes of an earthquake, because they were going through headache pains, but their footing felt from under them and they realized they were dizzy. Little did we know that we had Phillips 66 have a toxic accident or emission that night before. We had actually been in the community doing fish surveys, not realizing what we were being exposed to. Few days before that, down the way, a couple of miles down, Richmond, they were hit with 2 toxic exposures. And we're not given this information right away to even know what to do. And now we add the railroads to the equation for our communities, you know, to tell us, I mean, we appreciate the information, don't get me wrong, but we can't look at it from a statewide data angle. We need to look at it from what is in my community here in Vallejo, Rodeo, Richmond, San Francisco, Oakland. Like, tell us now, because many of our poor folks, particularly Black folks, are living right by trains, right by these polluting sources. And we get you can't solve everybody's problems, but at least those that you are tasked, we need some local solutions on what do we do. And I think Jose was touching on some of that with some funding. Definitely the folks on this call could really use that. But we need y'all to help us look at locally and individually identifying what's in my community here, or helping me to identify that. Because I can't look at it locally. I mean, excuse me, statewide. Mine is local.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So I think we have a comment in the chat, Alyssa, and then we can go to Chantal, or Chantal, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly.
I'm scrolling through looking for it.
I have it here. Let me go ahead and read it, and then we'll have a Jay or Jen respond. And so this is from David Woolley. The question is CARB looking at battery retrofits of locomotives as a control option? Research I have seen recently from UC Berkeley and NBNL suggests that batteries could be cost effective, particularly if also used for mobile grid scale storage. Is it possible to get a collaborative group going with one of the rail operators to try this out in a rail yard near EJ communities in Oakland or LA?
So Ajay, do you want to take that, or do you want me to start?
Please start and I'll jump in.
Okay, so CARB is actively offering funding for zero emission locomotive projects through multiple avenues. We're highly interested in anything that can zero out locomotive emissions, and we're starting to actively fund some battery electric projects in locomotives. We have the battery electric BNSF locomotive being deployed in the Valley right now, and we spend a pretty significant amount of our time talking with equipment manufacturers that are looking at different ways to build zero emission locomotives that can be in local service, that can be passenger locomotives, that can be potential line haul solutions. Those are the long distance locomotives. So I think the answer is yes, we're interested in all of it. There is funding right now for all of it if it meets the requirements. And yeah, Ajay?
Sure, I'll jump in as well. You know, through this regulatory process, we also had a 2-day webinar in October. So I'm trying to get, it was around Halloween time, and day 1 focused on technology. And Justin's presentation went into, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And I know your question was specific to batteries, and there are limitations to batteries as well. But as far as, especially in like local service, in shorter distances, batteries could be a solution. And we know that there are projects overseas in our discussions with manufacturers that are using battery electric locomotives to move, in this case, it's mining, but very applicable, similar applications could be put into service in California. And that's what we're hoping to encourage moving forward. So the answer to the question is, you know, batteries play a part, and could there be coordination? We would need to with the reg we have it right now, there are incentives to move towards zero emissions sooner potentially, and so that'd be something we would be we would be encouraged by a direction in, moving that direction.
And just to add on to the word incentives, since Mark raised it, and I completely hear you, Mark, when you say that it's frustrating to see public money go to moneyed corporations. When Ajay says incentives in the reg to move towards zero, what he means is that basically concessions, not free money. Like alternative ways to comply if they plan to use zero emission solutions.
All right, thanks, Jen and Ajay. Chantal, I believe that's who we're moving on to next, Alyssa.
Yes, Chantal, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chantal Sotomayor. I live in the city of Commerce, and actually I have the Railyard right in my backyard. And if I may, actually, I'd like to share an audio clip to show what it's like to live right up against the Railyard. So I'm going to play a clip real quick. So just FYI, it's going to be really loud. Yeah, so you guys heard only like 13 seconds of it. That actually went on for like over a minute. One of the days that, that's a casual day actually. And so those of us that live so close, we are tired of just vocalizing our concerns. I want to know what you guys are going to actually do to directly help us. Like, I want to hear an action plan with a prospective timeline for goals to be reached. What plan will you guys implement in order to limit hours of operation, have all zero emission equipment, zero emission trucks and trains in order to reduce the noise, reduce pollution, and reduce toxic smell? I really don't want to hear the word soon because they always say that. And I'm sorry. I'm just tired of hearing the word soon all the time, because if we continue to use that qualitative word, nothing will ever get done. So I would actually like to hear a date. And also the wall that separates our house or our backyard is about 4 to 5 feet. It's not even taller than I am, and I can see everything. It's so displeasing. There used to be a Japanese garden decades ago, and now we have to settle with that shit. So I'm tired of that shit, and it's something no one should normalize. I believe, Jen, you made a comment that you guys are little fish compared to higher ups of the Railyard. No, we're actually the little fish. The community members that are suffering are the little fish. And if you guys want to be considered the little fish, then we're the damn krill. So I'd like to hear an actual plan.
So just want to clarify really quick, Chantal, I completely hear your frustration. I agree with it. I also live close to a rail line. And when I said we are little fish, I was talking about all the people on the line. I am a person breathing air in California, but you're right. As a representative of CARB, that was I probably should have phrased that differently. In terms of real plans, CARB has real plans to move all Railyard equipment, and now with this draft locomotive regulation, locomotives also to clean as possible and ultimately to zero. And this locomotive regulation, action from this regulation should start in 2024. And will roll aggressively towards zero for all the years after that, and there's no sunset date for this regulation. It just continues to push towards zero until full zero is achieved. As far as the noise goes, that's very loud. I completely understand your frustration about the noise. I know horns are required to blow for safety reasons, and they're part of a federal regulation for precision scheduled railroading to make sure that people aren't nearby when trains are passing. That said, I wouldn't mind looking into what exactly triggers a horn blow and how long it has to blast for on your behalf, because that seems like a lot. Ajay, do you have anything to add?
I would just add that maybe a little bit more insight to, we didn't want to turn this into what the regulation components are, but essentially the older locomotives that are operating would be charged a higher amount to operate in the state. So by building that in, the goal is to move to ultimately the cleanest technology. So that's I hope that was, we're not turning this into a regulatory meeting at all, but that's the gist of it. So the tier 0 locomotives would pay more to operate in the state than the tier 1s, and the tier 4s would pay the least because they're the cleanest. And the only ones that we have that aren't paying into the locomotive spending account are those that are 0 emission.
Next, I see Lonnie, your hand is up. First, real quick, we have a comment from Community Watts Clean Air. If you guys want to respond, he says, bomb trains flow through Watts and now via TOC and Metro is proposed to run in between 300 apartments. The PM blows in the air. And how can CARB regulate the zero emissions solutions or move forward if necessary in legality to support EJ communities?
I'm not grasping, I may not be understanding the question.
Well, I think thanks for the comment.
Yes, thank
and
you.
and that's also the second one I believe I've heard from Watts. The other one was, if I'm remembering correctly. So thank you. And
Okay, Lonnie, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute your mic so you can ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Hi, my name is Lonnie, and I'm Executive Director for First Generation Environmental Health and Economic Development in the Bayview Hunters Point community. Born and raised there, we're surrounded by railroad tracks, throughout the, the Bayview Hunters Point community, all throughout that, neighborhood. And if you guys can, for me, touch bases on what are you going to do to provide funding for community-based communities, that are affected by these railroads? What are your intentions on and solution as far as the funding aspect of this? Thank you.
And just for clarity, are you talking about funding for compliance in terms of moving toward, zero emission, locomotives, or other types of funding that benefits the community? That would help staff formulate their response.
Yes, what I'm talking about is in regards to the railroads, what we're talking about now. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Jay, you want to take that one?
Sure,
So,
sure. Okay, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, did you say Jay? No, go ahead. It's fine.
Go ahead, Jen. Go ahead and start, and Jay will back you up.
Okay, so I hope I'm understanding the question. What is CARB going to do to provide funding for cleaner locomotives in communities? Have I understood it right, Lonnie? Okay, thank you for the thumbs up. So there is funding available for cleaner locomotives, particularly for the very cleanest locomotives, through at least 3 different funding pathways, and there will continue to be funding available on an annual basis. The funding is very much pushing towards zero emission at this point, and it may modify as a regulation comes on board. That always affects funding pots. A regulation usually drives the regulated community towards funding. So we should see a lot more participation in the funding programs, which is something we're actually looking forward to. Ajay, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think just to clarify that typically funding, I think Lonnie was asking about funding for the communities, and in the case of turnover of locomotives, the funds would need to go to the owners of the locomotives in order to turn over. And typically we have scrappage requirements of the old locomotives And we haven't seen very much participation in the last few years of our funding programs. So funding has been available, and I think the limit of the amount is up to 85%, and we we haven't seen much uptake of those grants in the last few years.
Yeah, and actually, I think one of the keys to that is also that in order to obtain funding, typically, if we're going to bring state funding or community funding to a problem, if we're going to pay for equipment, we want that equipment to stay within the state or within the community. The vast majority of locomotives travel all throughout the country. So if we try to limit funding to just the action that happens within the state, the funding amount becomes so small, it doesn't look like very much when you put it up against a locomotive that may cost $4 million for one piece of machinery. So it's really interesting to hear everybody come to this problem with a different point of view and a different idea about what the issue is and how to attack it. Some folks at CARB have been trying to figure out this same thing for 20 years. I've been at it for 5 years, but it's incredibly difficult. This is the first time that we're putting together a really massive regulation to try to tackle all aspects of the problem. So it's extremely wonderful for me to have read community feedback over the years where they say, stop doing incentives, stop doing agreements, do a regulation. And I'm excited that we're finally doing a regulation.
Okay, let's hear from Sabrina and then go back to LaDonna. I think those are the next two hands I see up.
And we also have Laura who wants to make a comment as well.
Oh, okay. Yes.
One second. Sorry, Sabrina, I have to scroll up to unmute you. Okay, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, yes. So it was mentioned earlier that regulations will kick in 2024, if I'm correct, if I heard that correctly. My question is, given the fact that people are literally dying and actively suffering, how can we be expected to be okay with hearing that there are going to be years more of suffering? Why are these regulations taking so long? There's obviously no shortage of data and testimonies, so why? Simply why? Can you offer an explanation that sums up why we need to accept another 3 years of suffering and death before regulations just kick in and then have to keep going until we reach zero? We wouldn't wait 3 years to prosecute somebody who walked up and physically harmed us, so why do we have to wait 3 years to simply regulate companies that are physically harming us?
I hear you, and thank you for your question. It is very frustrating. It's frustrating for us as well to move slowly and carefully through the motions of making this regulation. The shortest answer is we have a lot of extremely important legal hurdles that we have to clear, and that once we clear them, the operators that are in the regulated community are operating thousands of pieces of equipment. I think UP and BNSF alone bring about 12,000 locomotives a year into our state. We have to do this right in order to get it done. And I think that is one of the reasons that it's taken so long to get this far, is it's very, very difficult to do it properly. And CARB has a really robust regulation making process. And it's one of the reasons CARB has been able to get things done legally that no one else in the country and sometimes no one else on the planet has been able to do. So I think the short answer is I agree with you, it's too long, but it provides us with more certainty that we can actually do this very difficult thing. Ajay, do you have more to add here?
And Sabrina, thanks for your comment. I just add that the regulatory process, we're going to the board in April of next year. And so in order, we have to go to the board and then we have to go to the board again. So just the process itself takes time, and I know it's frustrating and I hear you. And we're working as fast as we can. My team is, putting countless hours in, and thanks.
All right, thanks. Yeah, thanks to Jay and Jen. Let's go to who was it, Laura, and then LaDonna.
Okay, Laura, you're unmuted.
Yes, thank you. My name is Laura, she, her pronouns. I live in Bell Gardens. I am expressing a lot of the same comments that have been expressed, and so my comments don't necessarily require responses as they're not questions. But I wanted to just express, I actually just got off of a meeting I'm a community steering committee member for AB 617 in Southeast Los Angeles for my neighborhood. And one of the things we actually touched on today was how to use our community incentive funds. And we talked about Tier 4 locomotives. And I was very concerned about this because, one, I know where trains are or locomotives are currently at Tier 2 or 3, right? And I don't believe that, I really strongly feel that we do not need to be using incentive money to create regulations for two major rail companies that have monopolized this industry, UP and BNSF, who have more than enough money to transition to Tier 4 so that we are able to breathe. We didn't ask for these industries to be in our neighborhoods, but they're here. Right? That is clearly environmental racism. Here we are now. And so because they're not going anywhere, because we're going to fight to stay in our neighborhoods, right? Because this is what we love. Then the least that they can do is pay their own way in an efficient and effective manner to transition to Tier 4 locomotives. So again, right, if there wasn't clear enough, we need regulations, but we don't need incentives to go with that. They can pay for that themselves. And CARB, I know, has to go to the EPA. I understand this is interstate. CARB needs to do, well, my recommendation to y'all need to do a better job. Y'all need to do the best job possible. I know we're not there behind the scenes, but y'all are there advocating for us to be able to have these clean rail yards. Y'all are fighting for us at the EPA level, federally, interstate, to make sure that all these neighborhoods across the nation have clean air, at least have Tier 4 locomotives, zero emissions when they're available or commercially available. So I just wanted to express that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Laura.
Yes, yes, yes. All of that. I agree with all of that so much. Thank you for saying all of it. Will you please come to our board meeting?
Okay, let's hop back to LaDonna. Thank you for being patient, LaDonna.
Okay, LaDonna, you're unmuted.
I think Sabrina kind of covered some of what I wanted to say. I was hooping and hollering when I was hearing her speak. I think it was Jen who mentioned that you don't, that there's no requirement to get rid of old trains, right? So again, I mean, it's frustrating sitting here listening because it sounds like, well, what can we do? We can, we can give these billion-dollar industry train folks more money to fix up their machines, but they don't have to get rid of the old machines, and you folks just got to deal with it. Like, really, people? I know Eastern Yard folks down in LA been hounding y'all forever. I'm sad to say up here in Northern California, we're slow to come to the table because we really just did not realize how serious the impacts are. When Lonnie asked about community funds, you guys kind of had a blank look on your face. And I don't know if you realize it or not, but then you kind of passed the comment around to each other. And I'm thinking, hold up a minute. They get the money and we get the burden. We got to flip that script, because I know for me and my family members, I've lost so many, it has me in a depressive state to where I'm almost literally afraid to talk to my relatives because I don't want to hear they're okay today. And then next thing I know, oh, somebody then passed away. It's like we don't, or they're diagnosed with cancer. You guys are tasked with this job to protect community through your knowledge, your expertise, and your money. You guys sound like you're afraid of industry whenever we say, okay, force them to do something, force them to reduce emissions. We're looking at 2030. I'm surprised to be in 2021, but 2030 down the road. Like, people, no, we gotta start treating this with some urgency. If they don't get rid of the old trains and they're able to just keep them in place and they continue to pollute, then what resources, what recourses do we have? And I'm sorry, but it's not acceptable to just hear you guys tell us, well, you know, only regulatory. Y'all didn't really answer Lonnie's question. There should be, Lonnie's question was, if I'm not mistaken, what funding is available for community groups to address this issue? And I think you said, well, there's a little bit of funds. Why is there a little bit of funds? Obviously, them funds need to be redirected. And I am getting texts. I'm taking credit for somebody else's question that they asked me because they're intimidated by this process, feeling like they may ask or say the wrong thing. And I first want to hear from you all, is there funding that is going to be made available to community groups, advocates, or residents that are working in a formalized way to address this issue? If they're not, I would appeal to you all to make that available. And then the other request I would have is to folks who are community residents, individuals, and I don't mean no disrespect. If you're homeless on here, we definitely want to hear from you too, because we haven't even touched on the homelessness camps that are located right next to the trains because they got nowhere else to go. But no, you guys got to do better. And I'm hoping every community person on this call tap your thing and ask to say something. I don't care if it's just to say hi, bye, or what, but we need to communicate. And especially if you got cancer in your families and have buried your family members like I have, we want to hear from everybody on here. Matter of fact, we want to hear more from community. And no disrespect, we like y'all agency, but we don't even want to hear from y'all. No, we want to hear from community.
So let me just respond to that, quickly with respect to the, to the funding. I think we're going to have to just kind of check into that and just continue that discussion with you offline. Don't have the information to respond right now, and so I don't want to give you misinformation. And then, the other part, I apologize if the person you're talking to feels intimidated by the process, but I do just want to encourage everybody, whenever we're having these toxic listening sessions, we're planning on having more. This is your forum. This is your forum, and so I don't want folks to feel like they're or be concerned about saying the wrong thing. What you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you want to share with us. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. And so I don't know if that helps, but I just don't want them to feel intimidated about it. So this is a different type of process. This is a listening session. This is for communities. This is not for industry. This is for community members. This is your forum to voice your concerns, whatever they may be. So, so who was? Did anybody else have any follow up on that particular one?
It looks like Lonnie and Chris's hands both went up during, and as well as Chanel's. So I don't know if you have anyone you want to start with in particular, Rich? Or...
Chanel, if she has a comment, she can unmute herself. I mean, she's a panelist. So she...
Sorry, I didn't realize I was a panelist now. My bad. So I'm going to be brief because I think the point is of what Donna, Sabrina, I mean, so many people have been saying this is a time for us to hear directly from the community, so I don't need to talk a lot. The things that I wanted to say is that part of why I am excited to be here is because what I hear in the listening session and what I'm taking in, and I think what's important and what's vital is like, what are we doing now? So it's helpful to know that like regulations are coming. We can work through that process. We can work through improving it. These are things that are great to hear. But what's happening right now in this immediate moment? I know, for the Office of Environmental Justice, I know that we have community air grants. I know we have the solicitation coming out in the first half of this year. I know that that's at least some funding, because let's be real, that's not gonna solve everything, right? Like we know that's not gonna solve everything, but I know that that's some funding that we have, and I have been checking with some of my staff to see like, they're pretty broad. They can be used for a lot of different things. And I think we can share that out as a resource. But I also just think, you know, and I'm just kind of hearing and taking all this in, there is a goal for us to think through, like, and come back with like, what's going to happen now? What is the kind of like, whether it's like, what is the research, what are the tools, what are the plans, et cetera, what can we do? And so I just wanted to kind of reinforce that I'm listening, I'm hearing, and I just really appreciate the vulnerability. And again, I think as Rich was saying, no one should feel intimidated because it's us listening. And I think it's us, you know, even in our responses, I think a lot of it really is going to be, how do we take this back in and shape what we're doing to make sure that we're responding to both the immediate needs that are happening right now, as well as like long-term and how we're shaping out this regulation. So hopefully I'm not over promising, but I just felt compelled to kind of share that and at least share that there are those air grants. And I know that Jeannie also talked about some of the funding that Caltrans has too. And again, I think those are some kind of maybe immediate things that we can send out that we can like make sure that people know about, just in terms of that funding piece.
Okay, thanks, Chanel. Okay, I lost track of who was next. Alyssa, who was next?
Let's do Lonnie and then we'll go to Chris. Lonnie, I've given you the ability to speak. Go ahead.
Yes, I think it's important that we have transparency here. If we don't know, I think we should say we don't know when it comes to the funding, instead of just trying to go off the top of our head. We want to be honest in this situation because this is a very important issue. Now, I'm going to give you an example. In the Baby Hunters Point community, they have a shelter in place for homeless people, right? And this place is right next to the railroad tracks and is by large, not only right next to the railroad tracks, but the concrete plant and actually the containers from the train that hauled off hazmat material from the shipyard. We're talking about toxic waste. So not only are we dealing with the, by the shelter in place, we're dealing with the toxic waste, but we're dealing with the railroad tracks and everything, and the containers just sitting there and everything just going through that area as far as various other things. So this is a serious issue. This is why I asked, if you can touch bases, because I know you're aware, you had to sit down and, collaborate this and, come about to what we're going to, do to take care of the situation. So there has to be some funding, just like, when you guys sit down and apply for a job or whatever, you know what you're going to get paid, right? You know how much you're going to get paid, so I'm sure you know about this situation. So let's be transparent. Let's, be honest. If we don't know, we don't know. Say, hey, I'll come back to you and I'll let you know later. I'm not for sure right now, but I would definitely get back to you and I'll let you know, because this is an important issue and it's serious. We need to help individuals who are, suffering from this situation. Like, LaDonna said, I have at least 4 family members that have cancer, and so we're dealing with a whole lot in the Baby Hunters Point community, as you guys know. I mean, but, railroad trains and railroad tracks, we got quite a few of them, throughout that neighborhood. So I just wanted to bring that. I don't want to, take too much of your time. Thank you, for listening, to us and addressing this issue. Thank you.
Okay, was it Chris and then Jan, I think?
Yeah, let's go to Jen. They've had their hand up for a while, and then we'll come back to Chris and Linda.
Okay.
And Helena after that. Okay, Jen, go ahead and ask your question.
Cool, thank you. Hi, my name is Jen Victor, gender pronouns they, them, the Tagalog word siya. I am an organizer with Eastyard, and I'm also a resident in Carson. And I actually grew up in West Long Beach, right next to the ICTF Railyard. So my question was related to kind of some of the comments that I believe it was Chantal Sotomayor said about particularly the noise. I'm lifting this up because when I grew up in West Long Beach, I live right next to the ICTF, literally maybe like 50, 40 steps away from where the rail yard is. Like you could see it and you could hear it at night. You could hear it and depending on how close you are, your house could also shake. I'm bringing this up because as an organizer, I work with a lot of residents that this is their normal. This is a normal thing they deal with in the evening. And so I wanted to ask, in terms of the regulations that y'all are trying to work on with locomotives, how are you also trying to prevent, yes, noise pollution, particularly in times of the day, and especially in the evening, where people are trying to get rest, because it's not just respiratory and health, respiratory and lung issues that people are being exposed to. This noise pollution is adding stressors to people's, to people, because they can't get sleep. And as I think Mark had asked, people are at home 24/7. So now they're exposed to noise 24/7, and they're going through school, dealing with noise. They're probably trying to go to sleep and they're dealing with noise. And then if they're unlucky, their house is shaking, their apartment is shaking, because some of these homes aren't built the best. And so what is CARB trying to do when it comes to regulation to ensure that, at least in the evening, we get some moment of levity, so that we're not exposed to these particular noise, sound, and I don't know what other, like shaking pollution, but yeah, what are y'all doing in terms of regulation that's going to help mitigate that, prevent it? Because that's also something that I don't know if y'all have factored in, but many residents are facing, and it's a pretty regular comment I hear from residents that are literally right next to the ICTF Railyard, which is owned by Union Pacific. And then also I just want to say I agree with everything that a lot of the community members have said. Yeah, like I moved to West Long Beach in 1997, and it's still the same things that I was dealing with. And I don't live in West Long Beach anymore, but yeah, it's been 24 years since I've been in this country. You'd think regulation would have moved at some point, because this isn't a new occurrence. And so I just want to also lift up, like, we need to, these policies and regulations should have passed like decades ago. And so, what is the way to move this along, because people can't wait. That's it. Check. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jan.
Okay.
And so Linda, was next, Alyssa?
Chris then Linda.
Chris and Linda, okay.
All right.
Yes.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, my apologies for being late. I was on an AB 617 Community Steering Committee call for Southeast LA. My name is Chris Chavez. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for Coalition for Clean Air, as well as a member of the Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach AB 617 community as a steering committee, as a West Long Beach representative. Really quickly, I do want to follow up on something Jan just mentioned about being able to hear the trains at night. So I live just on the other side of the river, just to the east side of the river. So I'm about 1.5 miles away from the Railyard, and I can hear them from my apartment pretty clearly. So be quite something to live on close proximity to those locomotives. One thing I do want to emphasize or want to point out, especially after coming off that 617 meeting I was just on, one of the biggest issues I think is also making sure that when plans are being made by state agencies, local governments, whatever, that there's a level of consistency and acknowledgement of what's happening in our neighborhoods and in our communities. I think I give a lot of credit to CARB for in working with environmental organizations and community advocates about the proposed high-speed rail BNSF rail yard out in Colton. That is right next to an AB 617 community. And it just shows when CARB, the Air District, whatever, can do a very good effort in trying to address some of these environmental justice challenges, but then another agency can come in and undo or worsen some of the issues going on there locally with minimal participation. So I think being able to make sure that that there's some sort of acknowledgement and respect of these community issues and the community needs, I think is going to be very important going forward. I think in terms of like funding and money for programs, for train replacements, whatever. I mean, certainly there's room for that. One of the biggest, I think, at the local level that's being done, at least in the South Coast, is an indirect source rule for rail yard facilities. So that work hasn't begun yet, even though it's something that has been committed to. Now, granted, South Coast is in the process of developing an indirect source rule for warehouses. and then rail yards are next. And from what it sounds like, South Coast may be pursuing a more direct strategy rather than what they're proposing for the warehouses. But really, it's going to come down to what the specifics are of the plan, and how, in terms of how effective it will be in reducing these community emissions, emissions released into communities. So as we're going forward and making new rules and regulations, we really need to prioritize community health and emissions reductions over mitigation or over voluntary compliance or whatnot. We really need to make sure that we're extracting emission reductions from these polluters.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And you're like, I think the second or third person also brought up the noise issue, and I don't think we have a good response for that. But I do have an observation, but I don't have the details, and so I think it's something I'm just going to look into. I live in a town up here in the Sacramento area that abuts against a rail yard. And they have done some things working with the rail company, in this case Union Pacific, to minimize some of the noise. I'm just not recalling all those particular details, number one. And number two, I don't know how applicable that is beyond that particular yard. Maybe we can connect a little bit later, because you got my curiosity peaked now. And so I think I'm just going to poke around personally and just kind of see what I can find, if there's something that can be shared on the noise front.
I can also add really quick on the noise that sometimes the horn blows automatically. The positive train control regulation makes it so that even if the operator is not touching the horn, if it's passing through a certain area, the horn blows. It depends on, if it's passing from a less populated area to a more populated area. Mm-hmm. That said, I know the operator has the option to blow the horn also. So we could find out at least what's the mandate, like where must they blow, how long must they blow for, and try to figure out if there's anything we can do there.
Okay, Linda, go ahead and.
I think one of our panelists had a response to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, jumping ahead.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Roger.
Yes, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. In regards to utilizing the train horn and so on, even in instances where you have quiet zones that are established throughout the state, the quiet zone is basically a railroad grade crossing in an area where they petition the federal government, and basically the locomotive engineer won't blow the horn in the instance where he's going through several crossings through town. Many towns have them in certain locations. However, regardless of all of that, locomotive engineer under federal regulation does have the right to use the horn when he deems it necessary, in the event that he sees what he perceives to be a person or something coming maybe out of the fog or a rainy night or whatever. He has the right to use that horn whenever he deems necessary. They can't really take that away from him. However, I think that for train horn and more information like that, any of the listeners who should take a look at the FRA website. There's a lot of great information on there. The Federal Railroad Administration. Take a look at their public website and look at noise pollution and things of that nature. There's a lot of information there.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Roger. So I think in a general sense, we'll take that one as one of our action items, just to get some more information on that we can that we can share. Okay, who was next, Alyssa?
Linda, you're next. Go ahead and unmute you. Linda? We can't hear you if you're speaking.
It looks like she's still muted. Linda, you just need to unmute yourself. I think I saw it unmute and then remute. Okay, let's take the next comment and give Linda a chance to check her technology. We can come right back to her.
Okay, Sabrina, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, so this is just a comment. I don't really expect or need a response. I just like to have this said. So I'm a college student at Channel Islands, and I'm actually here just for an assignment. I didn't realize how relevant this meeting was going to be to me. Since this meeting started, the train has passed directly in front of my house 3 times. So I'm kind of sitting here like, wow, I should have known about this meeting outside of class. So I think public outreach needs to be a bigger priority for you guys. You should be advertising these meetings much more and empowering citizens to get involved. I doubt that a single other person in my neighborhood even knows about this meeting tonight, and that's really sad because it's so incredibly relevant to their lives and their health, and they deserve the opportunity to know about these meetings without having to, be a college student. I'm privileged to be a college student and have that, source to guide me here tonight. But, I'm thinking about the other people who can't afford college and maybe can't even afford a computer to research, to get on your website and find this meeting to know about them. So I guess my main point here is that I hope you all know that however many comments you receive in these meetings, tonight especially, you need to know that the true number of people with the same feelings as us are exponentially more than what you are seeing here. I hope you don't leave here thinking that, a dozen or a dozen and a half people came out and complained. In reality, there are thousands of us who would likely complain in the same way and have the same thoughts if you'd given them the proper chance to be heard.
Yes, thank you. And if there's any thoughts that you may have on how we can improve that outreach, that's something that we're looking at with each of the talk sessions, just trying to do better. Just drop us a note. We're absolutely interested in that. We're just trying to reach as many people as we can. We're also interested in plugging into. We know a lot of communities have their own meetings and whatnot, and so we're happy to take a spot on the agenda. With their concurrence and talk further. And so just share with us the best ways that we can reach more people. That'd be greatly appreciated. Okay, who was next, Alyssa?
So it looks like Demetra Bundy has her hand up, and then LaDonna, I'm not sure if your hand is old or new, but we can get to you after. So Demetra, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Demetra Bundy. I'm an Indigenous organization called Kawatsan Circles, where we focus on the health and safety of our Indigenous lands, Native American, and our underprivileged and underserved communities, Black communities as well. And so I'm just wondering, I've lived in several different communities in California where we are surrounded by railroads, rail yards. And I'm wondering if there's any consideration that's been given to possibly looking at ways to reroute the trains or relocate the rail yards in a sense to help protect our underserved organizations. And yes, definitely if there's funding around being able to get the word out, I completely agree. I think it was Sabrina, the student that just spoke, as far as getting out this information to the communities. Definitely we need to get have more work surrounded around that as well. So thank you. And there were a lot of other questions, but a lot of the information that was provided as far as the health concerns and issues was answered. So I definitely want to thank you all for the information you provided as well.
All right, thank you. Can we check back in with Linda? We were trying to hear her next comment, but
yeah, let me go ahead and Linda, I'm gonna go ahead and try and unmute you. So let's see if this works.
Yay, success.
Okay, there we go. Yes, all right.
Yes, I agree with Sabrina. That's a big problem in Watts. It's the outreach to the community, because we don't find out about a lot of things that are going on until the decisions have already been made that affect our communities. and that's totally unfair to the community. My other comment is that the Alameda corridor spent millions of dollars on it. And I thought it was for those trains that are carrying all these chemicals for them to go underground with that. But even though you spent millions of dollars on that corridor, we still have, we call them bomb trains and Watts, still flowing through the center of the community. So I mean, you talk about resources and funding that's not available, but when you spend so many millions on a project like that, and then you still result to doing the same thing that you were doing before you spent the money, to me, it's just a waste of funds that could have been done to create some other avenue to so that we could breathe cleaner air. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
So we have a comment/question from Watts again. It's a two-parter. So first question, there is no emergency plan to continue to allow these infrastructures to continually move through EJ communities with all if the high risk. Will the people receive community benefits from the increased charge up for the locomotives? And then, well, let's just address that one and then we can do the other part of this.
Ajay, do you want me to? I'll take that really quick. The way the current regulation is designed, locomotive owners need to pay on a per megawatt hour basis into an account that they will use to buy clean equipment. The effect is very speedy uptake of the cleanest possible equipment. So the idea is as much money as possible going towards clean equipment to satisfy this need. In addition to having an air quality problem, California needs to continue to use all modes of freight to the maximum extent possible because there's a massive amount of freight moving through the state. So we have to sustain all of those industries or do this in a way that allows them to continue transporting freight. So I think the short answer is money from the regulation is not going directly to the communities. It's going to make sure that equipment gets cleaned up as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Jen. And then the second part was also historically, these same trains are the ones that left drugs and weapons on the track and tricked communities into gang culture and the war on drugs. The same trains that now heavily pollute homes, schools, local entrepreneurs, churches, and etc. When will we actually address the systematic racism deeply embedded in process and practicality? When will we put the people first? As we move forward, let's be innovative and not fearful to save lives and empower communities. People versus policy is dangerous grounds for all.
Yes, we greatly appreciate that. That comment. And one of the things I can mention in general with respect to that, and some of the other comments that have come up, meetings such as these, and at board meetings, please come and continue to make that point. It's just something that just needs to be consistently repeated. So I'm taking a quick look at our time right now. We're getting near the end of our time block. We actually did have a couple of poll questions, a lot of which have come up, but I think we just want to go ahead and to go ahead and put those up there. And the other reminder I'd like to to give, if you would also use that submit your question link, you could give us your email address, and then that way we could follow up with you on some of the comments and things that were raised here. That would be helpful. And and so we have our first poll question coming up there. And are we gonna start with poll 3 or we're gonna do poll 1?
Sorry about that, Rich. Let me pull up the first poll.
And so this is kind of like a quasi live poll, and so basically just take a few minutes to read the questions and just give us your response on those.
Heather, did you want to say something?
Yeah, hi all, good evening. This is Heather Arias and I work at CARB. The locomotive team works for me. And I just wanted to take a moment to really thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules, your personal lives, to come and share with us this evening. It is so helpful for us to hear from you. You know, we don't live in your communities. Most of us don't. We're not experiencing what you're experiencing, and hearing from you is so critical. So I just really wanted to thank you again for taking time out to spend with us tonight. We will be doing a workshop at the end of March. It will be during the day, but we will record it, make sure it's posted. We are available, as Rich said earlier, for any calls, emails, whatever you need. And if it works better for you in the evenings or the weekends, you know, just let us know. We'll make ourselves available. Greatly appreciate everything that you guys have shared with us this evening. We all took a lot of notes, and just encourage you to please continue to share with us. Send us your emails, send your letters in. We are trying to share your stories with our bosses, with our board, and we will try and do our best. Certainly, it's always best for them to hear directly from you, but we get that you are extremely busy. So thank you for your time tonight.
And then while we're finishing up, you know, poll number one, also, if one of the things that we're now doing with the listening sessions, we are issuing to interested parties certificates of participation. And so if you would like to receive one of those, also indicate that in the chat and to the submit your question, so that we would know that you're interested in receiving that. So give us your email and whatnot, that we can follow up with you and work on how we would get that to you. So the is this poll number 2?
Sorry. Did not mean to share the results. Let me get to go in here.
Okay, all right, yeah, bear with us, guys. We're trying to make this live and interactive, and so we're having some little, at least I'm having a little growing pains right here. So we'll get that worked out for future sessions. And so the next poll question is basically about equipment and rail yards that you're most concerned about. And so we're again just trying to get a sense of what's popping for most folks. And so just take about a minute to respond to that one. And then while you guys are looking at that, I could just kind of share with you some upcoming dates. So some were kind of mentioned. And so coming up in March 11th, so next Thursday, we're having our next working group meeting for the amendments to the chrome plating ATCM. And so that's it's a public meeting, so it's open to everybody. On March 16th, we have the next workshop for our commercial hovercraft, regulation. So that's coming up. That notice has been out. So if you need information about any of these, just let us know. We'll get it to you. As Jen has mentioned already, the next workshop for the locomotive regulation is coming up on March 30th. And then once we start getting into June, we haven't picked specific dates for these yet, but we're getting some more information out there. We're looking at having basically a freight day, just to talk more about our freight activities. And so, we're expecting that to be pretty interesting. And so just as soon as we get those dates, we'll get those out to you so folks can kind of mark their calendars. Also then coming up in September, the first set of amendments to our transport refrigeration unit ATCM is scheduled to be considered by the board. That's in September. And then likely in October also of this year, we're going to be doing our next air toxics update, to the board. Some of you may recall last September, we did a air toxics program update, and the board wanted us to come back and, keep them updated on, our progress. And so the listening sessions is part of that effort. And And then also in November is when, excuse me, the commercial hovercraft regulation is scheduled to be considered by the board. And then in December is a busy month. We got 2 activities going on there, and so drayage trucks. That's going to be part of our advanced clean fleet regulation, and so that's going to be considered by the board in December. And we're also looking at amendments to the chrome plating ATSM, putting that forth before the board for their consideration. So those are just some of the things that are coming up for the remainder of the year. And as new things come up, we'll kind of keep folks, up to date. So again, if you'd like some more information about those, you can also just drop that in the chat, and we can get you that. I know I kind of went over that kind of quickly. So have we reached the end of poll number 2?
And hey, Rich, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, because I have to go, my kids are like screaming at this point. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for inviting me to this listening session. I am super, super grateful. And I think one of the things that I did want to just flag for folks that I know, at least from the Office of Environmental Justice, we are doing listening sessions. I think what we know and we hear, I think what we've heard from different folks here is just how important it is to be hearing from communities directly. And I think one of the things that we committed to on like our last kind of Thursday night board, or whatever that Thursday night board meeting was hosting listening sessions with CARB leadership and community members. And so I know Jose is on the line here, and I've asked Jose to make sure that he's kind of documenting everybody that's here too, so we could start those CARB listening sessions. That's a little bit of a plug for what we're doing in the Office of Environmental Justice. But I just want people to know that I think I hear what's been shared, and I think it resonates very deeply with me. And I'm sorry that I can't stay to kind of see all the polls, but thank you guys so much.
All right, thanks, Chanel. And then let's quickly go to poll number 3. Then I know we have a couple of more comments. We have a little more time, and so we'll go ahead and take those right before we close. And so one of the things we're always interested in knowing what additional topics you would like to see a listening session for. This particular one, the locomotive one, was at the direct request of the community when we did our first listening session back in December. And so if you have thoughts about what you want to hear about next, let us know. If it's not on the list, you can go ahead and drop that into the chat, and that way we know what you're thinking about. And then while we're looking at the we'll give folks like a minute, and then we'll continue. And then I should mention we'll have these polls posted on the website, so folks who weren't able to participate live will have the opportunity to register their opinion. Okay, so let's just take a couple of more comments. And so I think let's go to Chantal first, and then we'll hop to Alina. I think she had some information about some of the SCP funding.
Okay, Chantal, you're unmuted.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you guys for all the community members that have spoken about all your concerns and frustrations. So I just wanted to say the picture I uploaded as my profile picture is actually what it looks like behind the wall in my backyard. Are there any regulations that can be placed regarding keeping the equipment, the trucks, the freight further away from the tiny wall that separates the rail yard from our backyard? What can you guys do directly about that to make us feel safer and more comfortable about living in our own home?
So I think that's something that will, that's a good comment. Appreciate that. I think that's something we're going to have to think about, talk about, and internally to see if you know, how that might, you know, come about. But certainly, if you have some additional thoughts on how you think we should be approaching that, I know we're at the end of our time. Just feel free to drop that in the chat or leave your contact information, and we can follow up with you and talk more with you about that directly.
And I'm sorry, it might not be the same for every screen. I know everybody's screen looks different, but is it the picture that we're supposed to be seeing? It's the ID picture in Chantal's box. Is that right? Because I'm not sure.
I think that's the Chantal. Is that what you're referring to? Because I think I was assuming that was it.
Yeah, my profile picture on Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was flipping through the screens trying to figure out what there's so many little tiny pictures.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I was referring to the profile picture. I actually don't have a plan because we suffer with just having this in our backyard. I was hoping you guys could provide a solution.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to speak with my the organization that is in my city. I feel like they definitely help a lot. They're kind of the heroes in our community is what I consider them, our community for environmental justice. So, I mean, we can try to see what we can come up with in terms of ideas, but we definitely need your guys' help in terms of implementing something that will actually happen.
Yes, understand. Okay, so I think I may have jumped the gun on some of the polls. I think the idea was to give folks a chance to see the results before we moved on to the next one, and so I may have slipped a cog on that one. So it looks like I don't see any more movement. So it looks like everybody's voted on poll number 3, and so let's close that and then just give folks a chance to see the results. And so you may have to to scroll down. And so, like on question 1, oops.
Which results do you want to share, Rich, for the last poll?
Well, let's start with poll 1, since that's I should have gone in order. So I messed that up. I should have gone in, in order. So let's see. Let's
sharing those now.
So this is how folks, obviously, folks on the call, responded. So, obviously air quality and health risks seem to be the drivers, but but as we talked, there's a lot of folks that were commenting on noise as well. And then what was the next one?
Okay, showing poll number 2.
And so this was the question about the specific equipment types that were at rail yards. And so, not unexpectedly, locomotives is the big driver, but also some of the the truck fleets, including drayage trucks, looks like they were also a big concern. Followed by TRUs, and then cargo handling equipment as well. And we do have on our roadmap amendments to our cargo handling equipment regulation to help with some of that. And then for poll number 3, let's just kind of see how that was. And if folks have a question on this, just any of these, just kind of raise your hand. We're still good on time. So topics, and so air toxics, regulations. And so one thing that would be helpful there is if you have, a thought about the specific air toxics regulation that you'd like to see, you can drop that into, the chat. And then it looks like the next one is really about our regulatory, process, which, as Jen alluded to earlier, is detailed, let's put it that way. And then, community involvement. And so that's another good one. And then permit programs on that. And so one thing that might be helpful, you can use the chat to do this, is when you say permit programs, are you thinking specifically about what happens at the local air district level? And then I see pesticide than trucks, once again. And, how'd you hear about the, the meeting? And so this is where I alluded to, earlier. Part of this is to help us, better target our, our outreach. And so we're definitely interested in hearing how we can do better. But it looks like most people were saying other. And so if you could just kind of drop in the chat what that other was, because it looks like that one is trending pretty well. So that'd be helpful to us. Meeting materials and discussion is what you were expected. Looks like for most folks, yes. But I see some disagrees in there. And so one thing that'll be helpful to us, again, drop in the chat, where we missed the mark, in your mind. So that'll help us, plan for future discussions. And on a scale of 1 to 5, and this one is one that's particularly important to me, because I do want folks to feel comfortable in these particular sessions. And it looks like for the most part, there were a number of folks that felt comfortable, but as was alluded to earlier, there were some folks who were not. And so if there's some additional things that we can be doing or things we should not be doing to help improve that, we want to know. We want to know so that we can work on improving that in the in the future. And then challenges, accessing the session. I know we're doing things virtually, and sometimes technology doesn't always cooperate. Looks like most folks were okay. If the folks that said yes, again, could just kind of drop a note, just let us know what challenges they had. We just want to make sure there wasn't anything on our end that may have contributed, to that. And then frequency of future listening sessions. Every month. So folks want more engagement, obviously, rather than less. Is how I'm interpreting that particular response there. So yeah, so that's good. So so it doesn't look like we have any more comments. And so just in closing, so once again, I just thank everybody for coming out and spending your evening with us. I apologize for going a little bit over. And just a reminder, if you want a certificate of participation, just let us know about that in the chat. You want us to follow up with you with anything specific, again, just indicate that in the in the chat. And other than that, thanks on behalf of the panel and myself, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we hope to see you at our next event. And so with that, everybody, good night. Yeah, good night, everybody.